Hi, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Playbook podcast. And we are at the end of our special, let's just say, what started out as a preview series for the Women's Euros ended up being a review series of the Women's Euros. And sometimes, yeah, life happens, and due to a lot of factors, it happened like that. But yeah, anyways, it, I felt like personally, I feel like it's pretty cool that we are ending with a country which you could say has a very defined style of play, and I would definitely count them as among the top top three women's football nations. And we're talking about Spain here, by the way. And what's unique about Spain, I would say, is that very homogenized style which they have from their youth teams all the way up to their senior teams. And I think that's a pretty cool aspect of it. And definitely that's a result of having the spine of that team being from the Barcelona Femini team. And I think that helps it well as well. So, yeah, I think also I think we're having a full circle moment as well. So, because seeing as we started with the Poland episode in the series, and how they were making their first major tournament debut, and now we're coming to Spain, even though they were very unfortunate to lose the final to England in the Euros gone by. I think they were very. I mean, I think they did prove that they are one of the top nations to consider, and they are the benchmark from which other nations would measure themselves. So, without further ado, I would like to start the actual episode, by the way. So let's rewind, more than 50 years back to 1971, when the then Spanish Football Association president declared, I don't think it's feminine from an aesthetic point of view. Women are not favored wearing shirts and shorts. Now, you would have imagined that you would be left to eat his words more than half a century later. Now, we don't know whether he's still alive when he had to eat his words, but yeah, definitely. It is something where, it was a pretty stupid opinion, let's say, and it turned out to be unfounded. It only took, let's say, 52 years for that to happen. Anyways, in 2023, Spanish women's team lifted the FIFA Women's World Cup. Now, this particular nation's journey is more than a story of athletic triumph. It's a powerful tale of evolution from underground resistance to what is now world-beating excellence. So let's just say, women's football in Spain began much, much earlier than many realize. So 1914, Barcelona saw its first women's team playing under the Spanish Girls Club, inspired by the English game. Yet for decades, matches were rare and often treated as spectacles rather than real sport. Now, the 1970s brought a groundswell of participation. Now, this participation was driven by a lot of efforts on the grassroots level rather than, with support from the institution. In this case, the institution being the RFEF. And it took figures like Rafael Muga, who organized secret matches and even created an unofficial national team in 1971, since the Royal Spanish Football Federation, or the RFEF, considered football unsuitable for women. All, and forget about the RFPF resistance. It was like pretty blatant. It led to the pretty infamous quote I referenced earlier, wherein he just dismissed the women's game, and official uniforms were not even worn by referees then, and as a result, the recognition was denied. But democracy's arrival in late 1970s Spain, from where they transitioned from the dictatorship of General Francisco Franco, to a more democratized uh, government, let's just say, it also signaled a shift in societal acceptance about the women's role in society, and it forced the RFPF to accept women's football as a result. And as a result, in February 1983, Spain's official women's national team played its first sanctioned match, which is a hard won badge of legitimacy after decades in the shadows. Now, we cannot, you know, talk about that particular era of Spain without mentioning a very special person, and her name is Concepcion Conchi Sánchez, who was named the captain of the Spain unofficial team at the tender old age of 13. So just imagine, I remember what I was doing at 13, and it's definitely not something of the magnitude that Conchi Sanchez was definitely doing. And she was carrying the hopes of a nation, although in an unofficial capacity. Imagine being 13 and you've been named as the captain of your national team, and also it just embodied the pioneering spirit of that particular unofficial team, let's just say. She was nicknamed Amancio for her dazzling play, and she was a star in the early, unofficial matches which were played by Spain before becoming a champion in Italy. However, in a very tragic tale, despite winning 7 Serie A titles abroad, she was never selected for the official Spanish team, which was a which is a pretty startling thing, let's just say. And as a result, her legacy is a reminder of how federations ignored their trailblazing women. And now we go from what was I mean, from a person who was like a pretty special person to a person who was a steward of an era of stagnation, let's just say. And that person is Ignacio Quereda. And from 1988 to 2015, a whopping 27 years, he coached the Spanish women's team. And it was a tenure which is marked as much by neglect as by any achievement. Now, despite being at the helm for 27 years, as I mentioned prior, his methods were widely viewed as outdated and dismissed. And it all came to a head at the 2015 World Cup, where that Spanish team underperformed. Now, all 23 players demanded his replacement, criticizing the lack of professionalism and respect within the setup. Now, let's move on to what has been who has been a really special player in the rise of this current Spanish team. And you could say she's one of the heartbeats of why Spain has started to do well on the international stage as much as they have. And that's Alexia Putellas. She was born in 1994, and she's basically the beating heart of Spanish women's football. Now, interestingly enough, she was raised in a basketball mad family, let's just say, and she sampled many sports before the layer of football, attracted her, let's just say, and her inspiration was very nearby and was struck at FC Barcelona in the youth camps alongside boys. Now, her childhood was pretty much shaped by instability in the women's game, which is a pretty unfortunate aspect of women's football of that era, and it involved her moving through multiple clubs before finally coming back home to Barcelona in 2012. 2012 was also a very personal year for her, as she suffered the personal tragedy of her dad dying just before an important tournament. And what we see now as her trademark, skyward gesture after scoring is a tribute to him, fueling her resolve both on and off the pitch. Now her rise, you could say, parallels alongside the professionalization of the women's game in Spain. Her creativity, vision, and drive. She became Barcelona captain, leading them to Champions League and Primera Division dominance. Her 2021 season was truly historic. She swept the Ballon d'Or, UEFA Player of the Year, and the Best FIFA award, the first time in history to win all three in a single year. And despite an ACL injury which ruled her out of the Euros in 2022, she became an emblem of resilience because her subsequent comeback inspired both teammates and fans alike. But let's just say her influence isn't only measured in trophies. She has been an outspoken voice for gender equality, LGBTQ plus visibility, as well as institutional reform. And she's leveraged her global platform, whether by protesting pay inequality, spotlighting conditions for women in sport, or simply living her authentic self. She reshaped how Spanish society perceives women athletes. And her journey from an overlooked talent, let's say, to a global superstar, an activist, reflects the very progress that Spain itself, or Spanish society itself, is supposed to make. Now let's just come to the crowning glory of this particular Spanish time, and that progress which they were showcasing slowly in recent times. It came to a head in on the global stage at the 2023 Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. Now, the group stage they were very, unsteady. Let's just say they finished second in their group, but once they entered the knockout stages, they just soared. They dispatched Switzerland, the Netherlands, as well as Sweden with slick possession-based football. Now the final, and like all finals, was a very tense and cagey affair, and it was separated by Olga Carmona's strike to clinch a tense 1-0 win over England, making Spain the second nation ever to win both the men's as well as women's World Cups. The first nation, by the way, is Germany, and it signaled a fairy tale chapter, and also it became a marker for what would become their next era. Now, this particular triumph was not like any triumph because it immediately started when the then RFEF president Luis Rubiales kissed Jenny Hermoso on the lips during the medal ceremony, an act which took away a lot of shine from the achievement of that special Spanish women's team, let's just say. And it was an act which Hermoso herself just described as non-consensual as well as deeply inappropriate. And you would think that the football association or the federation would side with the side of the players because they are the ones who make whatever it is, whatever name or fame the association is getting. But they close ranks immediately, claiming that the kiss was consensual. But then what has been a very common factor with the Spanish women's team especially is there is a unity. And there was huge unity and fury among Spain's players, and it set off a national reckoning. Now, in the days to come, 81 players, including the entire World Cup squad, went on strike demanding real change. Now, this incident, which was later dubbed the Kiss Heard Around the World, became a lightning rod for Spain's broader gender debate. Feminists, athletes, and even government backed the players as the hashtag Say Acabo, it's over movement trended globally. Deep rooted machismo and institutional sexism was exposed, with new scrutiny over the RFEF's culture as well as leadership. On February 20th, 2025, Rubiales was convicted of sexual assault, fined €10,800, and barred from Hermoso for 2 years. The verdict marked a very rare public reckoning, and it set a precedent, which is what Hermoso herself said. Her legacy now reaching far beyond the goals that she scored. And this case directly sped up the reforms at the RFEF, including dropping the women label from the national team, symbolizing a parity, a true parity, let's just say. Now we come to 2025, and despite a lot of executive shakeups, Spain remained a very formidable force. I mean, up until the final, that is, during the 2025 Women's Euros in Switzerland. Now they were led by coach Monse Tome, and they overcame plenty of illnesses and pressure, as well as blending a lot of the World Cup veterans with the rising stars like Vicky Lopez, uh, Salma Paravar Lelo, etc., etc. And they were trying to find that balance between the experience as well as youthful desire, let's just say. And they breezed through their group stage. They topped their group, and they had, let's just say, a toughish game against the host Switzerland in the quarterfinal. They edged past Germany in the semifinals in a game. Let's just say Germany held themselves or gave a great account of themselves, and you know it took Aitana Bonmati special strike for them for Spain to progress into from the semi-final into the final, and they met a very familiar foe in England again in a dramatic final rematch of the 2023 World Cup final. And even though they took the lead initially through Mariano Caldente, England held on, and Alicia Russo's looping header a forward header, let's just say, in the 57th minute from with an assist from a really clutch player in Chloe Kelly, ensured that the honors would be even at the end of normal time. Regular extra time also didn't bring any goals, and it went to pens. And unfortunately, Spain lost on penalties. But let's just say, even though they lost on penalties, the legacy will never be erased because reaching another major final just confirmed their status among the Europe's elite of the elite. The tournament also was not really, much of a uh, I mean, they didn't. I think on an individual level also, but Marty earned Player of the Tournament, and we had forward Esther Gonzalez winning the Golden Boot, underlining the depth and talent which is to come for in the upcoming years. Let's just say. I would like to say, like, I would like to end this by saying, Spain's rise in women's football was shaped by a lot of pioneers along the way, like Conchi Sánchez. We also had like the painful stagnant years, during those 27 years of the Quereda reign. We also have witnessed Alexia's, ascent into global stardom, and finally the peak being the World Cup triumph in 2023, which was immediately starred by uh, the president of a association which is supposed to protect its players, and then now to coming to this particular final against England, which was a pretty thrilling affair, by the way. And it stands as one of the greatest transformations in football, not just football, I would say in the world, in sport in general, right? The story that proves that victories off the pitch, society, the legal halls, as well as the hearts and minds are just as vital as triumphs on it. Now, this revolution will continue. But now I would say the world truly is watching and following this team and wishing them luck, along the way, I would say, due to their style of play. And thank you for tuning into this video. Please like and subscribe and drop a comment in the video. And yeah, we'll be back with some new content in the future. Something special is in the works. We have a lot of things lined up. And yeah, let's just see whether they all work out. But yeah, thanks again. Bye.